we thank all 5 of the speakers? Right. We now get to the stage when you can all join in and put questions to the speakers. It's all much more complicated than we thought when we walked into this room this evening, and I think, speaking for myself, I've learnt more than one thing tonight from each of the speakers. So we've got the opportunity now to tease out the issues. Jenny, have you got questions from online? So should we start with those while those of you in the room, you're not going to get off. If we take a couple from online, and then I'll see if there's some in the room.
Well, I should just say to start with that the chat is awash with congratulations for Imogen and Oscar for the heartfelt way that they put their arguments so persuasively. So well done to you. I think that gives a slight advantage that side. But we have got a few interesting questions. First question: How can the reduction of the age of majority to 16 provide clarity of rights and the necessary protection from harm?
Right. So, I don't know who wants to go first for that. Ruth, do you want to go first?
I'll happily go first, because part of our argument was based on uniformity, and actually a number of laws are already centred around the age of 16, not the age of majority. And so you do have these anomalies, and you do have this grey area between 16 and 18 at the moment. And one of the examples that we discussed when we were preparing this is that if you're the entrepreneur at 16 and you earn a bit of cash and you're paying a tax, and then you get your driving licence and you're on the road at 17, you can walk into the fancy car showroom and you can have that car and you can drive it out. Nothing stopping you whatsoever, except if you can't pay for it, the person you've bought it from can't enforce it against you. Because if it is a really swanky car, if it's the Aston Martin or a Ferrari, is that necessary? And you can only enforce contracts against 18-year-olds, if it's under 18-year-olds, if it's necessary. And so you have these anomalies, and uniformity at 16 will bring tax, sex, the ability to actually have a roof over your head that's more than a licence, all under the same age.
Great. So if there's any car salesmen in the audience who've got their vote. Deirdre, do you want to respond, or Shabina? Which? You've got to be near a microphone, one or other.
Well, I suppose I think the point that emerges, actually, interestingly, on both sides of the debate, is that it's essentially a question of balance. And I suppose the issue that you're trying to tease out, and I think it is very complicated, and I don't think there's a straightforward solution to it, so it might be best just to have a draw. But I think the real difficulty is to think about what happens in areas for vulnerable groups and vulnerable children if you do lower the age of consent. There's a very compelling argument that it's very difficult to argue against, that if you honour participatory rights of children and young people, then you do that by lowering the age of consent, you do that by empowering people, by bringing people within the franchise, and all of those things which are really attractive. But you can't do that without thinking about the consequences in a protective capacity. It's really well illustrated, I think, by Shabina's points about leaving a category of 16 and 17-year-olds unprotected. And where I think you try to strike the balance is the balance must always come down, it seems to me, in favour of protection. There comes a point, of course, where as members of society we are left to our own protection and our own devices. But the concept of childhood and the idea of minimum ages and ages of majority mean that you must define a category of persons who will come within the protective sphere, as it were, for a period of time. And the risk of lowering that so that you exclude individuals from that protective sphere at an enormous cost to them, I think has to be the thing that tips the balance. So that's where I would suggest, and I think Shabina has illustrated that exceptionally well. And that's not to say that the arguments about participatory rights are not compelling, because they are. They're very attractive, but they don't deal with that issue.
Thank you. Jenny, another one? Then we go to
Yes,
Paul.
this is for the Family Justice Council, the Young People's Board. Are there any matters that you think should be left at 18?
That's an ideal one. Maybe stuff around credit cards, potentially. I don't know.
When we were talking about it, you made a point about what you can and can't do online with buying and the use of PayPal. Do you want to tell them about that?
The ages for PayPal are much higher than many of the websites that will let you pay with PayPal, and that was kind of a discrepancy. But
What's the age with PayPal?
18.
They got to be 18.
And when Oscar and I were discussing it, what were you were able to tell me what you wanted to do when you were regarded as an adult by society. So do you want to tell them?
Travel without a parent/legal guardian and drive a car.
Good, very good. That's very compelling. Good. Shall we see what's going on in the room? Yes, lady over there. There's a microphone coming, so you've got to pick.
Hello, good evening. Thank you very much. Catherine Braxey, freelance journalist and floating voter in a sense. But I wondered, those speaking in favour of the motion, so lowering the age to 16, are you concerned that it exposes more children to adult jails if they're convicted of criminal offences at a time when there's already lots of evidence showing that the brain isn't fully mature until people are in their 20s? So there's a bit like Shamina's point about the vulnerable groups, so offenders and prisoners. There would be many more people who would have to move from the children's. I know this is a family justice thing, but just to bring the criminal law into it, you would move more people into adult prisons.
Well, firstly, I think there are two issues. And the first issue has to be the age of criminal responsibility, because as a society, whilst we're worried about safeguarding those between 16 and 18, we place criminal responsibility on 10-year-olds. The next point is, actually, when there is serious crime committed, are they that protected if they're only 16 rather than 18? Because they will find themselves in an adult court if you are charged at 14 with murder, and there are a number of cases per year where you are. You will face trial in a Crown Court. There will be adjustments for you, and you may be on a wing for the under 25s, but you'll be in a prison. So actually, lowering the age doesn't affect that. This is a more fundamental issue, isn't it, about criminal responsibility for those that are under the age of majority. The issue is, where do you set majority, and where does society think you become an adult? And what we're saying is, that's actually at 16, because we can do all the adult things, but what we can't have is the age of majority, because that's 18.
Shabima, Deirdre?
I suppose it might be an argument, might it not, for having a uniformity at the upper end, because it's very difficult, I think, to argue that an age of criminal responsibility of 10 is consistent with concepts of children's rights and protective approaches to children. And one of the themes that emerges time and again from the UNCRC committee with states parties is the age of criminal responsibility being too low, and everything that flows from that. So I think Ruth makes some really, really good points, but I wonder if there are not points about how you try to lift standards rather than lower them. And I think it's similar